Welcome to this journey through one of the most unsettling cases recorded in the history of the United States. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We are interested to know how far these documented accounts reach and at what moments of day or night they find their listeners.
The air over Waco, Texas has a heaviness to it in late summer, thick enough that sound seems to move slower, as if weighed down by the heat. On nights like that one in August of 1974, the Bosque River carries a damp smell of silt and riverweed that clings to everything. It was the kind of night when most people hurried home, eager for air conditioning and familiar walls. But for 19-year-old Anna Caldwell, August 19th was just another workday, ending the same way it always did, locking up, clocking out, heading home to dinner with her mom. Anna stepped outside the Bright Stitch tailor shop just before 7:40 p.m., the neon sign flickering overhead. She folded her uniform into a cloth bag as she did every night. Her manager joked about the heat and told her to get home safe. Anna smiled. She smiled easily, a trait everyone remembered later, and walked toward her pale yellow Chevrolet Nova. A small, modest car, its paint slightly faded, but Anna treated it with care. She slid into the driver's seat, engine rumbling alive in the quiet parking lot. The shop lights dimmed behind her as she pulled out, turning toward the highway. On the corner, a Gulf gas station glowed under tired fluorescent bulbs. She pulled in, stepping out into the warm night air. The clerk, Carl Benson, remembered her soft evening when she walked in, bought a Coca-Cola, and stood for a moment in front of the buzzing refrigerator door as if cooling down. She mentioned heading home early for dinner. Carl remembered the small smile she gave him. Polite, but a little rushed, the way someone smiles when they're almost home. What Carl didn't realize until hours later was that he wasn't the only one who noticed her that night. He recalled a tall man standing near the payphone outside, wearing a navy shirt with a smudge of white paint on the collar. He didn't hear them speak, didn't see anything unusual, just Anna stepping out with her drink, her keys dangling from her fingers. She passed near the man, and Carl remembered that tiny smile again. Not the bright one, the other one, quiet, almost apologetic. Then she headed to her car. The man walked the same direction. Moments later, the Nova's taillights faded into the night. And that was the last time anyone saw Anna Caldwell alive.
By midnight, in the small Caldwell house at the edge of town, dinner sat untouched. A plate of roast chicken and potatoes waited under plastic wrap while kitchen lights hummed. The second hand on the wall clock stuttered at 11:47, like it couldn't quite keep going. Ruth Caldwell, Anna's mother, glanced at the clock again, pacing from window to front door and back. The night insects outside were loud, but inside the house, something felt suspended, like the world itself was holding its breath. Ruth stepped onto the porch and called her daughter's name into the darkness beyond the yard. Nothing answered but cicadas. She waited an hour longer, then another. Sometime after 3, fear took over logic. By dawn, her voice was shaking as she dialed the Bell County Sheriff's Office. "My daughter didn't come home last night," she said, almost whispering. I know something's happened." Sheriff Wallace Ford arrived at sunrise, the sky still gray, the heat already rising. Ford was a quiet man, weathered by years on dusty roads and late-night calls. He entered the Caldwell living room where Ruth sat clutching a framed photo of Anna, the graduation picture in which she held a bouquet of sunflowers. Ruth wasn't crying anymore. Her voice had cracked so many times overnight that it left her sounding like a ghost of herself. "She never leaves without telling me. Never." Ford nodded gently. He asked questions, noted everything, took the photo, and promised to find her. He'd given that promise many times before, but something about Ruth's stillness made this one feel heavier. By 7:15 a.m., search teams were dispatched. Officers, firefighters, volunteers, anyone who could help. A large map lay across Ford's desk with red pins marking points: the Gulf Station, Highway 84, Waco Baptist Church, the Bosque Bridge. They began there, the biggest fears hiding in the deepest waters. The heat pressed down on them as they combed roads and fields. A convenience store clerk saw nothing. A farmer remembered headlights near the bridge during the night, thought someone might be fishing. Nothing suspicious, nothing concrete. But at the Gulf station, Carl Benson repeated the detail Ford had hoped to hear and feared. The tall man in the navy shirt. He wrote it down, his hand tightening. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a mother's instincts feel justified. By noon, search teams expanded toward the Bosque Bridge, a winding spot where the river curled under thick trees. They released dogs along the riverbank while boats swept the water. The searchers climbed through dense reeds, stepping over driftwood and cracked mud. The sun was merciless. Men wiped sweat from their foreheads, their boots sinking in the wet soil. Ford stood on a slope overlooking the current, cigarette trembling between his fingers. He couldn't shake the feeling that the river was hiding something. That afternoon, Sergeant Wayne Porter reported faint tire marks on soft ground near the bridge. Possible, but weather and traffic had muddied everything. 2 farmers said they saw taillights briefly the night before, yellowish, but paid no attention. The lights went off after a minute. Ford stared at the river, its surface glinting red-orange under the sunset. He ordered more lights, more boats, more searching. The kind of search that silently acknowledges something dark is lurking under the waterline. That night, floodlights swept the river's shifting surface. Eerie yellow beams cut across the black water while searchers trudged through mud that sucked at their boots. Crickets hummed in waves, drowning out the sound of hopes thinning with each hour. By the second morning, clouds hung low, the sky a dull slate. The river smelled of rot and thick moss. The search team approached a bend in the road near the Bosque Bridge, 200 yards out, when a firefighter signaled sharply. Ford stepped out of the vehicle. Mud splashed onto his boots. Through the trees, something pale gleamed faintly. The yellow Chevrolet Nova. Parked crookedly, driver's door slightly open, keys in ignition, a Coke can on the seat, unopened. And Anna nowhere in sight.
Sheriff Ford approached the pale yellow Nova slowly, as if it were an animal that might spook and run. The air around it was unnervingly still, like the woods were holding their breath. The morning mist clung to the edges of the windows. Mud splashed up the rear wheels. The driver's door hung open 2 inches, swaying the slightest bit with each breeze. Keys dangled from the ignition, motionless. Ford leaned inside. There was no blood, no broken glass, no sign of a struggle, just an eerie stillness, like the car had been abandoned carefully, almost respectfully. On the passenger seat, Anna's cloth bag lay open. A few coins in her wallet glinted. The floral pattern looked so normal, so painfully ordinary. An unopened Coca-Cola can rested beside it. Ford's breath tightened. The Coke Carl saw her buy. Sergeant Porter hovered near the trunk, scanning footprints embedded in the mud. The ground was a mess of overlapping impressions, but a few stood out. One small set, likely Anna sandals, and another larger, heavier set, a man's. 2 sets here, Sheriff, Porter murmured. Ford nodded slowly, though his eyes had already caught the deeper impression where someone must have stepped hard. He signaled for photos. Jerry Maynard, the youngest officer, eager but inexperienced, snapped Polaroids. The images slid from the camera in soft whirs, ink slowly forming in pale blotches. Ford held the first picture as it developed. It was blurry. The shadows swallowed too much. But something in the angle of the car nagged at him, a wrongness he couldn't name yet. Behind them, the river murmured, a low, constant sound like distant whispering. After an hour, they gathered what little they could: footprints, a scrap of white thread, faint dashboard scratches. Nothing conclusive, no real evidence, nothing that screamed crime, only things that whispered fear. Ford ordered the car to be towed. But when he returned that afternoon with a technician expecting a clean scene, he found chaos. Kids from nearby houses crowded around the car's former resting spot. Their shoes crushed the mud. Neighbors walked through, pointing and murmuring. A truck had left new tire tracks inches from where officers earlier stood. The scene was ruined. Ford just stared at the ground. Sweat trickled into his collar. His jaw clenched so tight Porter worried he might crack a tooth. But Ford said nothing, except, "Tow it, get it back to the station." No one argued. As the Nova was pulled from the mud, Ford couldn't shake the sense that they were losing pieces of the truth with each rotation of the tow truck's wheels. The car rolled away, leaving behind only damp ruts in the dirt. The Bosque River shimmered nearby, indifferent, almost mocking. That night, Ford sat in the station garage with a lukewarm coffee, staring at Anna's car under a dusty tarp. He barely slept. 3 days passed, and the Nova remained silent, withholding answers. On the 4th day, Ruth Caldwell asked to see her daughter's car.
Ford hesitated. He knew it wouldn't tell her anything except that her child was gone. But he agreed. Ruth stood beside the Nova like it was a coffin. Her fingers trembled when she touched the hood. She peered through the window at the empty seat where Anna once sat, laughing, singing, talking about her day. Ruth said nothing. Tears slid down her cheeks without a sound. Ford looked away. After she left, the car was released back to the family. Porter protested. They still had untested mud, fibers, the footprint. But Ford silenced him. "There's no budget, no leads, no case," he said quietly, almost like a confession. "They won't give us another $1 for a missing person call." Porter clenched his jaw. "We don't have a crime scene." Ford flicked ash to the ground. "We don't have a crime." That was the moment, the one historians would later circle in red ink, when the Caldwell case slipped from investigation to paperwork. The Nova left the station that afternoon. Mud flaked from its undercarriage like shedding skin. Whatever secrets hid in it were swept away with each bump of the tow truck. When the car arrived at the Caldwell home, neighbors helped maneuver it into a small garage. Ruth stepped back, hand over her mouth, and asked them to put a tarp over it. She couldn't stand to see it, couldn't bear to open the door. Night fell. The car sat in silence under the tarp, the smell of river mud lingering inside. It would never be inspected again. And no one realized they had just sent the last physical proof of Anna's final hours into a private garage to sit forgotten while dust gathered over years, then decades. Ford knew it. Deep down, he knew. 3 days later, in a room behind the station, Ford began interviews. Carl Benson described the tall man in the navy shirt at the gas station. The choir director from Waco Baptist confirmed Anna attended youth events. Her co-workers said she was kind, punctual, joyful. Her ex-boyfriend had an alibi. One name, however, kept slipping into conversations like a chill draft through a cracked window. Pastor Raymond Hale. He led choir practice. He spoke with Anna often. He prayed with her. He drove by her workplace sometimes. He was respected, beloved, a man of God. But he also happened to be present at the search scene unusually early. Ford called him in. Hale entered the station wearing a crisp white shirt, holding a Bible. He smiled faintly, politely, the way a pastor would greet a bereaved family. He answered questions calmly, voice smooth, face unbothered. "No, I didn't see her that night. I was at home. When I heard she was missing, I helped search. Anything to bring comfort to the family." Ford slid a Polaroid toward him. "That you?" Hale nodded. "Yes, I remember that day well. I was the one who found her handkerchief near the river." The way he said it, soft, almost tender, made Porter shift uncomfortably. After the interview, Hale walked out into the afternoon sun, his figure haloed in the light. Greer, the quiet deputy standing nearby, watched him go and whispered to Ford, "Something's off in that man's eyes." Ford didn't answer. He couldn't, because inside he felt it too. But with no evidence, he couldn't act. The state told him to stop pushing. The file was stamped, "No foul play suspected." That night, Ford boxed up what little they had. 6 blurry Polaroids, a handkerchief, and his own scribbled notes, and placed it in a basement storage room, a cardboard tomb for a girl who deserved better. He sealed it, labeled it #74 Caldwell, and walked away. He never solved another case, and Anna Caldwell's name faded from Waco
just like her footprints in the river mud.
For years afterward, the Caldwell case hovered like a rumor, fading, thinning, dissolving into the edges of memory, until it became something people weren't sure really happened. Old-timers would say, "Didn't a girl disappear out by the Bosque once?" And someone else would shrug, "Maybe, long time ago." A headline here, a whispered recollection there, nothing more. Ruth Caldwell left Waco in 1978. People said she kept her daughter's Nova stored under a tarp in a shed behind her new home in Temple, too afraid to open the doors, too unwilling to let it go. When Ruth passed away years later, the property was cleared out. The Nova, rusted, forgotten, was towed to the county lot and eventually scrapped with dozens of other vehicles, its undercarriage dropping flakes of Bosque mud onto concrete for the last time. No one documented it. No one preserved any piece of it. The last tangible fragment of Anna's final night was melted down, recycled into scrap metal, a detail that seemed harmless then, but would haunt investigators decades later. In Bell County's basement storage room, the cardboard box labeled number 74, Caldwell, gathered filth. Water leaks bloated other case files into mush, boxes collapsed under mildew, rats gnawed at corners, but somehow the Caldwell box remained intact enough to survive. Tape yellowed, label faded, but still readable. Most officers walking by never opened it. Some didn't know what it was. Others assumed it was just another missing person file that led nowhere. One trainee once scribbled across the lid, "Old Missing Girl, 1974, not realizing the weight of the case he was mocking. Even that scribble faded until it looked like a faint smudge. Waco changed. New shopping centers rose. Churches expanded. Highway 84 widened. People grew older. Kids who once played in the fields became parents themselves. But the Bosque River stayed the same. Quiet, murky, winding past memories it refused to release. And somewhere in Temple, Texas, a retired pastor named Raymond Hale continued preaching occasionally at small community churches, speaking gently about forgiveness and divine will. No one suspected the weight he carried. No one imagined that the quiet man pruning roses outside his home once walked the banks of the Bosque in the dark, leaving footprints no one photographed clearly enough. Time covered everything. Until March of 2022, the Texas Cold Case Review Project launched that spring, a statewide initiative to reopen long-forgotten missing person cases. Investigator Aaron Mills, 42, lean with a tired face that made strangers assume he never slept, was assigned early archival work. He scanned lists from dozens of counties, looking for cases that still had physical evidence attached. Most files were incomplete. Many were missing. Some had nothing but a single page. But one name caught his eye because of how little information was available and how much shouldn't have been left that way. Caldwell, Anna, 1974. He requested the file. The archivist wheeled out a metal cart with old boxes, one stacked unevenly at the bottom. Mills pulled it off the shelf. The tape cracked as he peeled it back. Inside lay a story held together by the barest threads of luck. A handkerchief, white cotton, embroidered with AC in fading blue stitching. 6 Polaroids. A small plastic bag with a strand of brown hair entangled in dried mud. And Ford's handwritten report stating, in words that made Mills's stomach twist, "No foul play suspected." Mills whispered, "How could anyone think that?" He inspected the hair under a magnifying visor. The follicle was miraculously intact, as if preserved by the dry environment of the old evidence locker. The handkerchief had the faint yellowing of age but no mold. The Polaroids, blurred, shadowed, and bent, still showed enough detail to reference. It was a miracle the evidence survived at all. That afternoon, Mills packaged the items using modern protocols and transported them to the state crime lab in Austin. Technician Laura Chen met him at the door. She held up the hair sample with excitement. "This is good, very good," she said. "If degradation isn't severe, we can extract full DNA." Mills felt a jolt of adrenaline. He nodded toward the handkerchief. "Try that too. Look for mixed profiles. Male, female, anything." Lara smiled. 48 years old? If we get anything, it'll be a small miracle. But 2 days later, she called him, voice trembling with disbelief. "We got DNA." It came first from the hair,
Then from the handkerchief. The cloth contained a mixture, female skin cells likely belonging to Anna, and male Y chromosome markers strong enough to run through the state database. Mills drove to Austin, heart hammering, and watched the techs run the final sequencing. Hours later, when the match popped up on the screen, every muscle in his body went still. The male DNA belonged to Raymond Hale, born 1948, longtime member of the Waco Baptist Church community, retired pastor, the same man in the Polaroid, the same man who claimed to find Anna's handkerchief, the same man who was inexplicably at the river before police arrived. Mills stared at the lab result page until the text blurred. He whispered the name like an accusation. Hale. He remembered reading Greer's note buried deep in Ford's file. Something's off in his eyes. A gut feeling dismissed for lack of proof. But now there was proof in purple ink and laser printers and modern forensic precision that didn't exist in 1974. And it pointed squarely at one man. Mills drove back to Waco that evening with the number 74 Caldwell box strapped into the passenger seat like a silent companion. He turned his headlights toward the Bosque River as he passed it. The water looked black under the moonlight. That same water had been hiding secrets since the day Anna disappeared. When he reached the station, he opened a new digital case file. Caldwell, Anna, reopened 2022. Suspect, Hale Raymond. Status, active investigation. Recommended action, immediate full reconstruction of 1974 timeline. Mills stared at the old Polaroid again, the one where Hale stood near the Nova, half his face swallowed in shadow. The young pastor's expression was hard to decipher, but something about his eyes seemed hollow, as if he wasn't looking at a search scene, as if he was revisiting something he already knew too well. He clicked on the image, enlarged it, and whispered, "You were there before anyone else, weren't you?" Outside, the Texas night was still and hot. Inside, Anna's story was finally waking up.
For 3 nights, Aaron Mills barely slept. The Caldwell case pinned itself to his mind like a splinter too deep to reach. Each time he tried to rest, the same images surfaced. The Nova parked crookedly near the Bosque, the unopened Coke can, the blurred Polaroid of a young pastor standing too close to something he shouldn't have known was there. To move forward, Mills needed a timeline. A real one, not the fractured, incomplete one the 1974 investigation left behind. He cleared a wall in his office and taped up every photocopy, photo, and witness note. Red string connected key points. He worked in silence, the air thick with dust, the hum of the overhead light the only constant. 2 pillars supported the case: 1974, the night Anna vanished, and 2022, the proof finally emerging. The bridge between the two was the truth hidden in the overlapping shadows. He began where all timelines begin, with the last moment someone was seen alive. 7:40 p.m., Anna leaves Bright Stitch. 7:52 p.m., she buys a Coke at the Gulf station. Shortly after, her Nova heads toward Highway 84. Sometime between 8:10 and 8:20, the car comes to rest near the Bosque. He pinned these times to the board. Then he studied Pastor Hale's old statement. Hale claimed he left Waco Baptist Church around 8 p.m. and went straight home. That alone wasn't odd, if it were true. But the church's choir practice logs told a different story. Mills found the entry dated August 19, 1974, written in clear, neat handwriting by the choir director. Choir dismissed 7:30 p.m. Not 8, not close to 8, but 7:30 sharp. Mills called the choir director, now elderly, living in Abilene. Her voice wavered with age, but she remembered that night with unsettling clarity.
"It was hot," she said. "Too hot. He ended practice early. Said he had to leave on urgent pastoral business." "What kind of business?" Mills asked. She paused. "He didn't say, but he left fast. I remember he grabbed his briefcase like a man late to something." Mills drew a red circle around the time. 7:30 p.m. Hale leaves church. If he got in his car then, he could easily reach the Gulf station by 7:42, 7:45 at the latest.
right when Anna was buying her Coke. He took a step back, studying the timeline. "So you weren't home at 8, he murmured to nobody. "You were on the road." He followed the thread further. The Polaroid was the next anomaly. Ford's old report said the search team reached the river around 8:15 a.m. the next morning, yet the Polaroid shadows suggested early morning light, not mid-morning. Mills wasn't an imaging expert, so he called one, a woman named Sarah Gutierrez, at the Texas Cold Case Review Digital Lab. When she enhanced the photo 3 days later, she told him to sit down. The light direction in the Polaroid was unmistakable. It was taken around 6:40 to 6:50 a.m., roughly an hour and a half before Ford's team claimed to arrive. And there, partially obscured by brush, was a shape Mills hadn't noticed at first, the faint glint of something on Hale's wrist, a watch. Silver, mesh band, round face. The same one he wore today, nearly 50 years later. Even more chilling, the watch in the enhanced Polaroid bore the same tiny scratch along the bezel that Mills noticed when Hale watered flowers in his yard 2 weeks ago. The Polaroid wasn't lying. Hale was at the scene long before police. Maybe long before dawn. Maybe just after Anna vanished. This wasn't happenstance. This was someone returning to a place he knew. Someone revisiting a moment he orchestrated. Someone surveying his work. Mills pinned the enhanced image to the board and stared at it long enough that the room around him faded. The last piece he needed to place was the church record he found inside an archived binder. Hale's handwriting on August 19th, "The Lord teaches us when to leave." Mills whispered, "You weren't talking about choir practice." He circled it and read. Something was forming, a shape, a pattern, a truth too obvious to be coincidence. To solidify the timeline, Mills reached out to Waco Tribune-Herald's archives. A staffer named Henry, old enough to have processed the 70s archives himself, found original negatives from the Caldwell search in one of the paper's storage boxes. He called back with a tremble of excitement. "We found a frame that matches yours. It's shot from a different angle. No police tape. No officers in sight." When Mills saw the scanned negative, he felt the hair on his arms rise. It showed the nova. It showed the same slope. It showed Hale, but no police. No volunteers. No one else. Just Pastor Raymond Hale standing with a flashlight in hand, pointing toward the riverbank. Pointing not as if searching, but as if indicating where something or someone was. And at his feet, a subtle drag in the mud. Like the path of something pulled or carried. He felt nauseous. He stepped away from the screen and gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. He was here before anyone. He knew exactly where she was. When he returned to his desk, he added a line beneath the Polaroid. "Hale at scene before sunrise. Police arrive 8:15 a.m. 90-minute discrepancy." The final detail emerged when Mills compared the 1974 weather log to the Polaroid's lighting. Shadows indicated the sun rising from the southeast, consistent with dawn. He had all he needed to request a warrant. He typed the request with hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of justice finally catching up with a man who had spent decades hiding behind a pulpit. Evidence, DNA match on handkerchief. Timeline, proven false. Location, at scene pre-police arrival. Behavior, inserted himself into the search. Pastor Hale should be considered the primary suspect. He submitted the warrant. Then, alone in his office, he stared at Anna Caldwell's graduation photo pinned to the board, her smiling with sunflowers, unaware her story would be twisted by time. Mills spoke softly. "We're coming for the man who did this. Hold on just a little longer."
Outside, the Texas winds swept through the trees, carrying whispers from a river that had held its secrets far too long.
The arrest warrant for Raymond Hale was signed just after sunrise. Mills didn't wait. He drove with sirens off, preferring the silence, a silence thick with anticipation, dread, and something that felt almost like relief. After weeks of living in files and memories and grainy Polaroids, this morning finally belonged to the living, to action. Temple, Texas was waking up slowly.
Sprinklers ticked across faded lawns, neighbors shuffled outside for newspapers, the sun stretched across rooftops in long orange stripes. Birds perched on telephone wires, chirping reminders that life continued, even when old horrors resurfaced. Hale's neighborhood sat quiet, an unassuming street where nothing dramatic ever happened. Mills parked halfway down the block to observe the house before backup arrived. The place looked peaceful. White shutters, blooming rose bushes, a bird feeder swaying gently in the breeze. A house built on the illusion of innocence. At precisely 7:20 a.m., 2 unmarked SUVs rolled in. Federal task force agents stepped out, men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with plain lettering. They moved briskly but silently, surrounding the property. Mills approached the front door with Agent Colton Reyes, a broad-shouldered man who radiated calm. Reyes knocked once, firm, and announced, "Pastor Hale, this is the Texas Cold Case Review Task Force. We have a warrant." A pause, a soft rustling behind the door. Then it opened. Raymond Hale stood barefoot, wearing an ironed button-up shirt, gray hair neatly combed. He stared at the officers with an expression that was neither fear nor surprise. Something else. Something unsettling in its composure. "Good morning," he said quietly. "I've been expecting this." Reyes stepped forward, reading the warrant aloud. Mills watched Hale's face closely for any flicker. Denial, anger, shock, nothing. The pastor simply extended his hands, wrists together, palms up, as though offering himself for communion. Cold metal clicked shut around them. "Raymond Hale, you are under arrest for the murder of Anna Caldwell." A neighbor watering her lawn froze, hose trembling, water spilling onto the sidewalk. Another woman peered from behind a curtain. Shock spread across the street like a ripple.
Hale didn't look at any of them. As he was led to the SUV, he turned his gaze toward Mills, eyes soft, almost gentle. "You think you understand," he said, "but what you see is only the surface." Mills stiffened. "We'll see what the truth looks like." Hale smiled faintly. "You already know." The words lingered in the morning air like the last note of a hymn. Inside the interrogation room, hours later, Hale sat with perfect posture. His hands lay flat on the table, fingers interlaced lightly, not fidgeting, not trembling, just resting. Mills entered with a file tucked under his arm. "You've aged," Hale observed, as though they'd met before. "In your heart, I mean." Mills ignored the comment and opened the file. "We're here to talk about Anna Caldwell." Hale nodded. "She was a kind girl. Your DNA was on her handkerchief. Is that so? You were at the river before sunrise." Hale tilted his head. "Memory is unreliable, investigator, especially after 50 years. Mills slid a Polaroid across the table. "This isn't memory. This is you." For the first time, something changed in Hale's expression. A tiny pulse of recognition, a shadow flickering across its features. But it vanished instantly. "You think that proves something?" Hale asked softly. "It proves everything." Hale leaned back in his chair. "I am a pastor, investigator. I've prayed over countless tragedies. I offered comfort that morning, nothing more. You were alone at the river hours before police. That is your interpretation. You lied about when you left church. Perhaps I misremembered. You handled the handkerchief. I found it. I never claimed otherwise. You told a woman you had urgent pastoral business. What was so urgent you dismissed choir early?" Hale smiled. "People come to me for guidance. I go when I'm called." "Who called you that night?" Silence. Mills pushed further. "You were at the gas station. Witness saw you near Anna." Hale blinked, slowly, intentionally. "A lot of people visit gas stations. You followed her. Do you think so? You killed her." Another silence. Longer this time. Hale's eyes drifted to the camera in the corner of the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost wistful. "Sometimes the Lord leads us to dark places, and sometimes, investigator, the darkness is already inside a place long before we arrive." Mills leaned in. "Where is she? Tell me where you put her." Hale tapped a single finger against the metal table, rhythmic, measured. Mills realized it was the tempo of a hymn. He whispered, "She never left the river." Those words chilled the room. At noon, the interrogation ended with Hale offering nothing more. Not confession, not denial. Just vague allusions that made Mills' blood run cold. Hale requested a lawyer and refused further discussion, but his last line echoed too clearly to ignore. She never left the river. Mills met with the search team that afternoon. They pored over old maps, looking for any place the original investigators had missed. The Bosque River stretched miles, curving through thick forests, hidden ravines,
and muddy inlets too dense for search teams in 1974 to traverse without advanced equipment. Now, they had that equipment. They assembled boats fitted with sonar, brought cadaver dogs, deployed drones with thermal imaging. The river, once too daunting and vast, was finally within reach of modern tools. A humid wind pushed through the trees when they began. The sun shimmered on the water's surface, screen-like. The first sonar sweep came back empty, the second too. But on the third, something emerged, a shape unlike the natural debris typically found underwater. Angular, compact, metallic, too symmetrical to be driftwood. Technician Reyes leaned over the sonar display and murmured, "That's not a rock." The reading was roughly 7 feet long, buried under silt, covered by thick layers of mud. Mills' pulse kicked. "Mark the coordinates. We're sending in divers." 2 divers descended. The water was murky, visibility nearly zero. They used their gloved hands to feel through the muck. Minutes passed, then one surfaced, gasping. "I found something. Metal frame. Looks like a container, like someone intentionally weighted it." Mills felt a tightness in his chest. A container, large enough for what they feared. Reyes called for a crane lift. The machinery groaned, water churned, mud erupted from the river's surface as the object rose from its resting place. Dark, rectangular, corroded. It was a metal storage trunk, exactly the size of a small body. Mills stepped forward as the crane lowered it onto the riverbank. The air felt different now, heavier, charged, as though the river itself resisted giving up what had been hidden for almost a half-century. The divers backed away. Mills stared at the trunk. His voice cracked. "Open it!" Bolts were cut. The lid was pried. A stale breath of air escaped, a trapped exhale from 1974. Inside lay fabric remnants, bone fragments, a delicate locket, the faint outline of a life frozen in time. And wrapped around what remained of the torso was a piece of cloth, white, aged, embroidered faintly with blue thread. A.C. Anna Caldwell had finally been found.
The riverbank fell silent. Even the cicadas seemed to stop their constant summer buzzing, as if nature itself paused in recognition of what had just surfaced from the depths. Investigators stood motionless, gloves half pulled, tools still in hand, breath suspended. The metal trunk that had slept beneath the bosque for nearly half a century now lay open like an unearthed coffin. Inside, what remained of Anna Caldwell rested in the muted stillness of time, reclaimed. A locket glimmered faintly against the dull gray interior. Mills reached forward gently, almost reverently, and picked it up with gloved fingers. A tiny sunflower charm hung from the chain. Inside, beneath cracked glass, was a black and white photo. Ruth Caldwell holding Anna as a toddler. Mills closed his eyes. He didn't need to imagine what this moment would have meant to Ruth. The grief, the release, the ache of knowing and the ache of knowing too late. Beside him, Agent Reyes whispered, "We got her home." They both knew that mattered. The forensic team moved in, documenting, photographing, preserving every fragment. They spoke softly, voices lowered out of respect. An anthropologist gently lifted each bone, placing them onto clean linen sheets. The coroner's assistant cataloged each item meticulously. Cloth remnants, hair strands, degraded fibers of what was once a dress. And the trunk itself told its own dark story. The investigators studied the weight system. 2 rusted metal plates, bolted to the bottom, clearly added intentionally. Enough to ensure the trunk stayed submerged through storms, floods, decades. Someone knew exactly what he was doing, Reyes said. Mills didn't respond. He was staring at a small detail inside the trunk, a thin thread of navy blue fabric wedged in a corner. He recognized the shade. The same color as the shirt the gas station clerk described in 1974. The same color Hale wore in the Polaroid. Proof. Silent but damning. By late afternoon, the riverbank had transformed into a full crime scene operation. Tents erected, evidence bags stacked, cameras flashing. The water churned where the trunk had been lifted, sending ripples gliding toward overhanging branches.
Mills stepped away to make the call. He dialed the state crime lab, then the DA's office, then the Bell County Sheriff's Department. But he saved one call for last, a number from the old file, written in faded pencil. The only living relative Mills could find, Mary Caldwell, Anna's cousin. She answered on the second ring. "Hello, Miss Caldwell?" Mills said softly. "This is Investigator Aaron Mills. I'm calling about the case we discussed, the one involving your cousin, Anna." A pause, a shaky inhale.
Yes, we found her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mary's voice trembled. Oh God, after all this time? Yes, Mills said. We're bringing her home. She whispered something, too soft to catch, but he knew it was gratitude tangled with grief. After the call, Mills returned to the riverbank where the trunk had been loaded into the coroner's van. The van doors closed quietly, respectfully. A moment of collective silence followed before engines started, and the caravan began moving toward the county medical examiner's office. As they drove away, Mills remained behind, watching the water. The Bosque River looked indifferent again, calm, swaying, moving on. But Mills felt something like anger stir in him. 48 years? He left her here for 48 years. He turned toward the road where his SUV was parked and headed to Temple. They weren't done. Back at the Bell County Detention Center, Pastor Hale sat in a holding cell, hands folded neatly in his lap, as though he were preparing to lead a quiet prayer service. A guard escorted him to the interrogation room for a second session. This time, Hale wore no gentle smile. When Mills entered, the pastor raised his eyes with an almost tender expression. "You found her," he said softly. Mills didn't sit. He stood at the table's edge, chest tight with fury. "She was exactly where you left her, weighted, hidden, alone." He blinked slowly, contemplatively. "You say that as if the river didn't hold her. Nature cradles what we give it." Mills slammed a folder on the table, the sound sharp. "You put her in a trunk." He didn't flinch. "A vessel, a coffin," Mills corrected coldly. "You buried her in water." The pastor tilted his head. "Do you think burial on land makes much difference after death?" Mills leaned forward, voice low and seething. "Death didn't put her in that trunk. You did." Silence stretched thin. Finally, Hale spoke, each word deliberate. "She was frightened. I tried to help her. I did. But sin takes many shapes." Mill's hands curled into fists. "Say her name." Hale's eyes softened in a way that felt wrong, an imitation of empathy. "Anna." "What happened that night?" Hale inhaled, long and slow, as though drawing air through half-century-old memories. "She was looking for a ride. She knew me, trusted me. No one said she asked for a ride." Hale's smile was thin. "People say many things. They forget even more. You followed her. You cornered her. I guided her," he murmured. "You murdered her." Hale looked up, eyes narrowing just slightly. "If that's what you choose to believe, where did you take her?" Hale folded his hands. "A pastor's duty is to lead those in distress. You led her to the river. You think I forced anything, but you weren't there," Mills snapped. "Then tell me what happened." Hale exhaled. "Some truths are meant to remain with God." Mills stared at him, pulse hammering in his ears. But Hale wasn't finished. "She was calm at first, then afraid. I tried to pray with her, but fear is loud. It drowns the voice of faith." Mills felt his throat tighten. "You hurt her." Hale didn't answer, but his silence was an answer. "You killed her," Mills repeated, "and you hid her like she was trash." Hale's eyes flashed, not with guilt, but irritation, as if Mills had insulted him. "She was not trash. She was a soul in need of deliverance." "And what did you think you delivered her from?" Mills demanded. Hale's reply was soft. "Herself." Mills froze. Hale continued. "She was conflicted, tormented by doubt. I tried to help her, but she resisted. She cried, and the river—" He paused, gazing past Mills at something only he could see. "The river accepts what the world rejects." Disgust twisted in Mills' gut. "You're trying to turn this into a sermon." Hale's lips curled faintly. "Everything is a sermon." Mills turned to the camera. "He's done." The door opened, and two deputies stepped inside. Hale rose smoothly, like he'd just concluded a church lesson, rather than a murder discussion. As they guided him out, Hale looked over his shoulder at Mills one final time. "You've done well to bring her home, but you still don't understand The whole story. Mills didn't answer. He couldn't. Rage knotted behind his ribs, and beneath that rage, something colder, a dawning dread that Hale might be hinting at something larger, something unsaid, something yet to be uncovered. For the first time, Mills wondered, was Anna the only one? The thought settled heavy. Inside the hall, the metal door closed behind Hale with a hollow echo, and for the first time since reopening the case, Mills felt fear, not of the past, but of what else the past might still hold.
That night, long after Hale was returned to his cell, Mills sat alone in his office, with only the desk lamp casting a warm, tired glow. The Caldwell evidence board loomed before him, photos, strings, timelines, notes, and for the first time since he reopened the case, the board felt unfinished. Not because the central question remained. They knew who killed Anna. They knew how he hid her. They knew where she spent nearly 50 years waiting for someone to bring her home. But Hale's final words carved into Mills with a sharp, lingering unease. You still don't understand the whole story. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't denial. It was a warning. Mills leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Part of him wanted to dismiss the words as manipulation, another twisted sermon designed to rattle him. But another part, the part that made him a good investigator, knew better. Hale didn't speak without intention. Not in 1974, not now. Across the room, the air conditioner clicked on, sending a cool breeze rolling over the papers strewn across Mills' desk. One sheet fluttered to the floor. It was a page from the 1974 interview logs, Ford's notes on community tips. Mills bent down to pick it up, and as he did, his eyes landed on a name he recognized but hadn't thought twice about. Something clicked. He reached for the remaining logs and flipped through them, scanning quickly. Another name, another mention, a third. They weren't connected in any official sense, but each note referenced strange incidents. Young women who had encountered someone they described as a helpful pastor, or a man who offered prayer, or a man who said God sent him. None of the tips were followed, none were investigated, most were dismissed as rumors. But one thing bound them. Each incident occurred either shortly before or shortly after Anna vanished. Mills sat back heavily. Was Hale hinting at this? Was Anna not his only victim? The thought chilled him, but he forced himself to push it aside. For now, there was still unfinished business with the Caldwell case. And first, he needed closure. 3 days later, the Bell County medical examiner completed the post-recovery assessment. The official findings matched what investigators had feared but suspected. Anna Caldwell's remains showed signs of trauma consistent with blunt force and compression. Several ribs fractured, wrist bones showing evidence of binding. No signs of drowning. She was already gone before entering the river. In the report's final line, the examiner wrote, "Based on condition of remains and evidence recovered, this is ruled a homicide." Mills closed the folder gently. Justice, long delayed, had finally taken shape. A memorial service was arranged by Anna's surviving cousin, Mary. It was held at a small Baptist church in Temple, a place quiet, simple, with white-painted walls and stained-glass windows that filtered sunlight in soft, somber colors. A single-framed photo of Anna stood beside the podium, the same graduation photo she took before her disappearance, the same one Ruth had clutched the night Ford came to her door. Only a handful of people attended. Family, a few neighbors, investigators, and Mills himself. They gathered not out of lingering gossip, but out of respect for a young woman whose story had been lost in time, but finally found again. Mary spoke first. Her voice trembled as she recalled childhood memories. Anna chasing fireflies in the yard. Anna laughing during holidays. Anna singing off-key in the background as Ruth cooked dinner. Small memories, ordinary moments. But that's what made the grief deepen. The ordinariness of a life interrupted. When she finished, she stepped down from the podium and squeezed Mills' hand, whispering, "Thank you for giving us back what we thought we'd lost forever." Mills could only nod. After the service ended, he stepped outside, letting the warm Texas breeze hit his face.
The evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the church lawn. For the first time in months, he felt something lift from his shoulders. A weight finally eased. But closure was not the same as completion. Inside the detention center, Hale awaited arraignment. The courtroom would see a frail, aging pastor sitting quietly with folded hands, listening as prosecutors outlined a case decades in the making. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, timeline reconstruction, photographs, recovered remains. His attorney would argue contamination, procedural flaws, misinterpretation, but none of it would matter. The truth was stronger. And so, in a small, echoing courtroom filled with reporters and locals who remembered the whispers from 1974, Judge Ellison read the charges aloud. Raymond Hale, you are formally charged with the murder of Anna Caldwell. The room fell completely silent. Hale showed no reaction, no fear, no remorse. He only glanced toward Mills, who sat in the second row, and offered the faintest incline of his head, as if acknowledging a long, inevitable conclusion. The trial was set, the evidence prepared. The DA assured Mills that conviction was not just likely, it was certain. But that night, after returning home, Mills still couldn't shake the unfinished feeling, the echo of Hale's quiet voice. You still don't understand the whole story. He knew Hale was taunting him. He knew the man wanted to seed doubt, yet something beneath that taunt felt disturbingly real. Something like the shadow of a second truth. He opened his laptop and typed a few names from the old notes, tips that had never been followed, reports that Ford never had the resources to pursue, statements that seemed unrelated until now. As he searched, patterns emerged. Slowly, quietly, the way ink spreads through water. Women around Waco, teenage girls, two hitchhikers, a runaway. Reports of a gentle pastor offering help near the river during the early 1970s. None of them ended in confirmed harm. None turned into disappearance cases. But the pattern was too precise to ignore. He leaned back, heart sinking, realization dawning. Anna might not have been the first woman he followed. She was simply the first one who didn't escape. He closed the laptop slowly. There would be more work to do, more questions, more cold files to reopen. The Caldwell case had reached its rightful ending, but the shadows around Hale's past were only beginning to stir. For now, though, justice for Anna Caldwell was no longer a question. It was a truth carved into the record, undeniable and final. In the quiet that followed, Mills spoke softly to the empty room. You're home now, Anna. We found you.
Outside his window, the Texas night stretched wide and still, carrying the sound of distant wind, moving gently through the trees, rustling leaves, whispering of stories once buried that might yet rise to the surface, just like the Bosque River had finally done.